Good day, dear professors, dear students. We are now at the public lecture dedicated to the state of human development in the world and in Moldova, which is going to be given by Antonio Vigilante, the former high-level UN official, who we welcome warmly. The event is dedicated to the International Day of UN Organization, which turns 73 years from its establishment and 26 years of activity in Moldova. Today we're also inaugurating Millennium Documentary Film Festival, and Antonio Vigilante is a member of jury. And the festival will be between 24th to 26th of October in Odeon, Chișinău. The entrances.
Din partea Centrului de Informare a Organizației Națiunilor Unite din cadrul LIMS, funcționat ca fiind coordonatorul centrului, doresc să aduc mulțumiri ONU pentru sprijinul acordat procesul de promovare a politicilor, strategiilor și activităților ONU. Înainte de a oferi cuvântul onoratul oaspete, aș dori să fac o scurtă prezentare. Antonio Vigilante este oficial de rang înalt al ONU, are experiență funcțională foarte bogată, astfel am să menționez experiența Moldovei doar din ultimii ani. În perioada anilor 1996, Antonio Vigilante a fost reprezentant permanent PNUD în Bolivia. În perioada anilor 1996-2001 a fost coordonator rezident ONU și reprezentant PNUD, permanent PNUD în Bulgaria. În 1999-2001, reprezentant special al PNUD pentru dezvoltarea post-conflict în Europa de Sud-Est. În perioada 2001-2006, coordonator rezident ONU și reprezentant permanent PNUD în Egipt. În perioada anilor 2006-2014 a fost directorul oficiul ONU și PNUD în Bruxelles. În 2014-2016 a fost consilier secretar general al ONU și coordonator rezident în Liberia. Așadar, în continuare ofer cuvântul stimatului ex-oficial de rang înalt al ONU, Antonio Vigilante, iar dumneavoastră, dragi studenți, vă rugăm să fiți cât mai atenți, fiindcă la final o să aveți ocazia să oferiți întrebări stimatului oaspete. Please, Antonio Vigilante.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. I must say I feel quite lonely on this big table all by myself. I hope to interest you with this presentation this morning. You know that the United Nations publish every year since 1990 a report on the state of human development in the world. And so I have prepared the presentation based on the latest data available that just came out 1 month ago. So I've tried to give you a picture of what is happening in human development in the world, particularly with reference to your country, to Moldova. I must say that human development is a concept that has changed the way we look at development, because before this concept was launched and then quite disseminated in the 90s, everybody was measuring progress only in terms of money, in terms of GDP per capita eventually, but only in terms of resources. Now, it doesn't matter that the distribution was not taken into account. Other aspects of what makes our life worth were not considered, like health, education, freedom, and so on. So we try to change what the concept of development is by explaining that human development fundamentally can be defined as the enlargement of people's choices. It means that the more choices you have of what you can do, what you can become in your life, the job you want to do, how you want to live, the more developed you are. The less choices you have, the least developed you are, because you are forced to do things in life that perhaps you don't want to do or were not your preference or your choice. So let's start. As you can see, I'm a fan of comics, and I always use Mafalda because she's just phenomenal in terms of her expression. Let's start with the overall picture. This is every year each country for which measurement and statistics exist are ranked in human development. So this year, the country that came on top as the one with the highest human development, as you can see, is Norway, followed by Switzerland and followed by Australia. On the contrary, on the right, you can see the countries that close the list, the bottom of the list, which is South Sudan, Central African Republic, and Niger. Now, the countries are divided in 4 categories: very high human development, high human development, medium human development, and low human development. Where is Moldova? Moldova is number 112 in the list, but still belongs to the category of high human development. Actually, is the last country in this category of high human development. The index goes from 0 to 1. So 1 would be the top development, let's say, that we can reach, and 0 is the absolute absence of development. Now, normally in the slides you will see I compare Moldova with countries that are either neighbors or in the region or are comparable by size. For instance, you can see on the bottom of the slide where are other countries in the vicinities, like Romania or in East Europe, for instance. When you see, I don't know if the acronym has remained the same in the translation, ECA means East Europe and Central Asia. This is the group to which Moldova belongs. So it's useful to compare what's happening in Moldova with what's happening as an average in that region. Now, the index of human development, the Human Development Index, is composed of 4 main elements, but representing 3 dimensions of development: health, education, and income. Education has 2 indicators: the expected years of schooling for someone that starts schools today, and the mean years of schooling, which is the actual years that represent the average in the country today. The health indicator is life expectancy. How many years someone born today can expect to live? And the income is represented by the GNI, the gross national income, but in not only per capita, but in purchasing power parity, so that comparison between countries are allowed. Otherwise, if it was in absolute terms, we wouldn't know, because the costs in each country are very different. Purchasing power, meaning that we equate the purchasing power so we can actually compare. This slide is very interesting because it shows you the gaps that exist in the world. We live in a world of strong inequalities, where some countries have it all and some countries are lagging much behind. You can see the 4 dimensions, the 4 components of the Human Development Index here: life expectancy, expected years of schooling, mean years of schooling, and the gross national income per capita in purchasing power parity with dollars of 2011. Now, most of the data refer to the year 2017. These are the latest data available worldwide. You can see the difference, which is sometimes very striking. For instance, someone born in Hong Kong can expect to live 84 years, someone born in Sierra Leone, 52, which means by the very fact that you are born in Sierra Leone, you lose 32 years of life on average. Imagine on the school, Australia is projected, not today, but is projected for someone who starts schools today, that they will go to school for 22 years. So probably most of them will reach masters and PhDs, right? Instead, in South Sudan, if you start school today, you can expect to be in school less than 5 years. So in this case, you can see that inequalities are likely to continue rather than to be reduced. And this is the situation of actual years of schooling for the young people today, for those that have just finished. And you can see that between Germany and Burkina Faso, the difference is 12 years. So a German person normally goes to school 14 years, and in Burkina Faso 1 year and a half. The same for income. Income perhaps is even more noticeable. If you are in Qatar, your GNI per capita is $116,000. If you are in Central African Republic, your yearly income is $600. So it means about 100 times, right? Now you can say Qatar is very small, very peculiar, they have oil and so on. But even if we take Norway, you can see in bracket, Norway has 67,000 as GNI per capita. So compared to the 663 of Central African Republic, still is 100 times. So this is the size of inequalities in the world, which we believe has to be corrected. Is fundamentally unfair. What are the trends? Where are we going? I'll try to be a little bit faster, not to keep you here all morning. The first one is, there is a small mistake. The change in the rank is between 2012 and 2017, and not 19 as the slide says. Which are the countries that have gained more positions in the ranking, let's say? You can see in the last 5 years, from 2012 to 2017, Ireland is certainly the country that has made the most progress. On the contrary, countries that are in conflict, like Syria, Libya, Yemen, and Venezuela, have lost many places, many ranking orders. Moldova has lost 3 positions in the last 5 years. In the region, Bosnia is doing well and has gained 7 positions. This is, at the bottom of the slide, you can see the average improvement or the average change in the Human Development Index over the last 27 years, from 1980 to 2017. And you can see in comparative terms that Moldova has had a pace, let's say, of 0.27 increase every year in the index. And some countries have done really well, like Mozambique or Mali in Africa, which is good news. So African countries are progressing. And some other are really lagging behind, like Lesotho, Libya, or Tajikistan. The good news is that since when we calculate the Human Development Index, no country has lost index, let's say it's a worse index today than it had when we started to calculate it. So overall, there is progress throughout, but in some cases very slow, in some other much faster. The good news is also that the gap between the most developed countries and the least developed countries is closing at the level of countries a little bit. But it is also logical, because if you start at a very high level of human development, the progress that you can do is small, is minimum. If you already have a very low infant mortality, how much can you improve? You can get to 0, potentially. But of course, if you start from a very desperate situation where you have an infant mortality of, say, 120 per thousand, then there is a lot of scope, and a small measure can make you jump and improve dramatically this situation. So you can see that on average, the change in OECD countries in those years has been 0.49, and it has been 155 in the least developed countries. So they are gradually and slowly, but still catching up. Now, when we look at how Moldova has done in the last decades, we have compared with countries that had a similar Human Development Index in 1990 and compare with the situation today. So you can see that Armenia and Albania in 1990 had a very similar Human Development Index than Moldova. And this is the trend. So they all had, for obvious historical reason, a drop in the early 90s because of the change of socio-economic and political system, but then the recovery has been at different paces. So you can see the red line, which is Moldova, has recovered less slower than the other two countries, particularly Albania seem to be doing quite well. They all have improved, they all have recovered and improved with respect to the original starting point, but Albania has done much faster, much better. Now, as I was telling you, what the report shows more than anything else is the inequalities that exist in all dimensions. So for that reason, also we calculate a coefficient of inequality, of human inequality, which means how the access to health, education, and income is distributed among the population. So the same components of the index, health, education, and income, when we analyze how is distributed within the country, you can derive a coefficient of inequality. As you can see, Japan seems to be the least unequal country with an index of 3.3, and Comoros seems to be the country with the widest inequality. Moldova is doing on average what the region, East Europe and Central Asia is doing, not too bad, with an index of 10 coefficient. Now each country and each region has peculiarities. You can see at the bottom that each continent has a specialty. In sub-Saharan Africa, for instance, the widest inequality is found in life expectancy. Within the same country, the huge gap between those that can expect to live, say, 50 years or 70 years. In South Asia, on the contrary, the highest gap is found in education, and in Latin America and the Caribbean, in the distribution of income. The regions that have least inequality are OECD and East Europe and Central Asia. Of course, we look very closely to gender inequality, and the finding are not for all the countries the data are available. So in this case, only 160 countries have data that are comparable. Moldova is doing relatively okay. I mean, 48 out of 160 is relatively egalitarian with respect to others, but more or less in line with the region. As you can see, Romania is number 31 in this ranking, particular ranking. Ukraine is 61. The most egalitarian seem to be Switzerland, and the worst seem to be Yemen, where there is more gap in development between male and female. Now, what is interesting is that there are 20 countries that when you calculate the index for female and male separately, show that the female human development index is higher than the male human development index. 20 countries, including Moldova. So Moldova, in fact, is a decimal point, 0.01, where of women human development that is higher than male. And if there was not for this 0.001, Moldova would be in the medium human development category. So thanks to women, Moldova could go to the high human development category because of this 0.01 of women more developed, let's say, than men. Only one country shows that income of women is higher than men, and this is Burundi. I cannot explain it because I haven't studied how come, but it seems that in income distribution in Burundi, on average, women have higher income than men. Now, if we go to the specifics of what is happening in the sectors that are important for human development and health and education, I would say that in the case of Moldova, the health indicators are in line with the region, East Europe and Central Asia, and in education they are quite good. Particularly, Moldova is doing very well in literacy and primary education, less well in tertiary education, where still below the average of the region. You can see that the enrollment in tertiary education in Moldova is 41% of the age class, of the age group. And of course, you can see again the inequalities. In the case of tertiary enrollment, for instance, Greece 117% and Eritrea 2%, which means almost no one goes to university in Eritrea. Now, I don't know if you are familiar with statistics and so on, because you can wonder how can it be 117%, more than 100%. It's because the statistic is referred to the age group. So normally you are expected to be in tertiary education, say between 18 and 25. But if there are people out of this age group, older or younger, then you can go beyond 100%. So this is why probably if there are many unemployed in the country, for instance, they are more likely to enroll in university just to do something or to try to improve their skills. So you go above 100%. And this is the case of Greece, which recently has experienced an economic crisis and high unemployment. So I suppose a lot of people that were not considering to study have then enrolled late in the university. Just I want to draw your attention again to the gaps of some indicators. See, infant mortality is dramatic, because in Iceland, for instance, you have only 1.5 is per thousand in terms of infant mortality, the babies that die before 1 year. And in Central African Republic, we have 88. It means per thousand, so it's almost 9%. And the same is in literacy, where you have many countries that have reached 100% literacy and countries that still have only 15% literacy, like Niger. And the same gaps you find in secondary education and in primary enrollment and tertiary enrollment. If we look at the situation of work and employment, then there are very puzzling findings, but maybe they are puzzling more for me than for you that know your country inside out. You can see in Moldova there is a very low employment to population ratio, so a very low participation in the labor force, only 40%. This means people that are either employed or are seeking employment. The rest are not seeking employment. Of course, migration has a lot of effect on this, and people depending on remittances and do not work also have an impact on this. Nonetheless, the data, the indicator is so low, like in Arab countries, where traditionally have low participation by women. On the contrary, you can see that the labor force is very high in some countries like Madagascar, and very low, as I was saying, in North Africa, for instance. Moldova still shows a very high employment in agriculture, as you know, and it has low unemployment, both general and youth unemployment. But again, this has to be seen in relation to the labor force, which is low. What is most worrying probably is the data at the bottom, which is 28% of the young people in Moldova, they are neither in school nor at work. In a way, do not participate in active life, neither working nor studying, 28%. You can see the relation and the comparison with other countries. For instance, the average of the East Europe and Central Asia is 21%. There are a lot of observations in the Human Development Report. Some relate, for instance, to human security. This is not only security, safety from violence, but also from any event that can disrupt your life. For instance, I have selected some indicators that I found interesting, like the suicide or the homicide rate. In Moldova, the suicide rate is quite high for male and not so much for female. But in general, the homicide rate is low, even compared to the average. You can see 3.2 homicide every 100,000. Then you have the number of refugees by origin and so on. One of the most troubling finding is that in a survey where it was asked whether it is justifiable to beat your wife if you are a man, and the same question has been asked to women and men, in 60 countries out of 82, women have said that it's justifiable to beat your wife more than men. They justify it more than men, which I don't understand, because it seems to be a little bit masochistic. in a way, of course, is part of the dominating culture, of a sense of guilt, and perhaps the socially correct answer that they want to give to the survey. I'm not sure, but certainly it's something to be changed. I mean, if women do not rebel to violence by family violence, then who will? It has to start from there. So as you can see, I've tried to express how surprised I was by this finding. In terms of movement of people and mobility, as you know, Moldova is one of the countries with the highest remittances per capita and in relation to the GDP. You know it very well. There are countries that have a higher incidence even, like Kyrgyzstan or Haiti. But if you compare with the Romania, for instance, or Albania, you can see how much more important remittances are for the economy of Moldova. Other data of access to communication and mobility show an internet access for Moldova relatively good, 71%, compared to almost 100% in Norway, but Eritrea 1%. Mobile phones very high, 93%. In Austria, however, there are 163, means that each person has 2 telephones or 2 lines, almost. Tourism is interesting because it shows how much scope there is for improvement. In the case of Moldova, 120,000 tourists are not too many compared with other countries you see. Not necessarily have to take Paris, Spain, France, England, Italy, that are very high destination for tourism. But even if you compare, say, with Montenegro or Mongolia, which are lower, let's say, are smaller and less attractive to tourists worldwide, you can see that there is scope for improvement in tourism. And also the last data shows the incidence of official development assistance in the case of Moldova, which is quite high. It's 4% of the GDP, is one of the highest in the world. You can see even developing countries are only an average of 0.4. Now, within the developing country, you also have China and big countries and so on. So obviously the relative importance of foreign aid is limited. For a small country is a lot more. Now, this is objective data, what I've shown so far, but there are also perceptions and indicators of quality of some of this data. So when you look at life satisfaction overall in Moldova, it is very much in line with the region. 5.3 in a scale of, I think, is 1 to 10. You can see the more satisfied overall of their life are in Finland, and the least satisfied happen to be Burundi, Afghanistan, and South Sudan, and you can see intuitively that this is right. Now, it's interesting in the case of Latin America, they are the most satisfied, in spite of the fact that Latin America is the highest homicide rate of all the continents, and in spite of the fact that they have the lowest credibility of governments. So Latin Americans do not trust their government, a highly violent society, and nonetheless they are the happiest in the world. So it means that there are many other factors that not necessarily come into the statistics that influence the way we feel, obviously. The climate, the social relations, the arts, the music, whatever. The standard of living, well, Moldovans are not very satisfied with their economic standards. 56% only feel satisfied. Feeling safe is also a very interesting finding, because male do not feel particularly safe in Moldova, 50% only, compared with an average of the region of 71%. But for female, the situation seems to be dramatic. 35% only of female in Moldova feel safe. Now, how can it be compared with the low homicide rate and, let's say, low violence in society? What may explain this is that Moldova shows high rates of domestic violence. which means that perhaps you can tell me, probably women feel insecure because the domestic environment is insecure, is unsafe in many cases. Otherwise, you know, I've worked in Liberia. I can tell you that the situation of women in Liberia is really very bad. Very bad, and there is a reason for women to feel insecure. Rape is extremely high, domestic violence is very high, and nonetheless, Moldovan women feel as insecure as Liberian women. Something is wrong there. So I put our sign of stop violence against women. Obviously, it is felt as a problem in the country. In terms of the quality of human development, because we say numbers, we say averages, but what is behind literacy, enrollment rate in secondary school, in tertiary education, and so on, in health? When you look at the quality of the service and how people perceive them, it's a combination of subjective and objective data. In health, Moldova seems to be doing better than average of the region, particularly when you look at the numbers. Hospital beds or the ratio of how many doctors per habitant, per capita, the indicators seem to be high. In education, in spite of good enrollment, except in tertiary education, I'm sorry to say that Moldovan students do not do particularly well in internationally comparable examinations in humanities and in science. Both, they are below average results, which may point to some failure in the quality of education at some levels, or maybe just accidental. I don't know, it was a bad year or whatever, the students were absent-minded that day, I don't know. But internationally speaking, the results for Moldovan students are not flattering. What is good as an indicator of quality of life and services is that in Moldova, rural electricity is available to everybody. Now, in the world, again, there are huge inequalities and large gaps. You can see, for instance, that in Norway, there is a teacher every 9 students. In Central African Republic, there is a teacher every 83 students. Imagine to be in a class with 83 students. I mean, how can you study and learn? Or hospital beds, only 1 per 1,000 people. Actually, I think it's 10,000 people. In Japan, 137. And in physicians, Cuba has 75 doctors every 10,000 inhabitants, and Niger or Liberia have not even 1. We look now at the last 2 elements, the sustainability elements, environmental and socioeconomic sustainability. Moldova still rely a lot on fossil fuels, as you can see, and too little on renewable resources. And you can compare with other countries. You can see there is no need for me to read. What are good indicators for Moldova are that the emissions of CO2 are not high, which is also a symptom perhaps of a less industrialized country. And also the mortality because of pollution, either of the air or the water, is low in comparative terms. So still a relatively healthy environment. When you go to the socio-economic sustainability, then you have a mixed picture. Particularly, the skilled labor force is only 60% in Moldova. If you compare with Japan, for instance, where 100% of the workers are skilled, but of course, you cannot compare with Burkina Faso, where only 4% of the workers have relevant working skills. The average in the region is 71%, so Moldova is a bit below. Also for research and development, numbers are not particularly encouraging. 0.4% only of GDP is dedicated to research and development, when the international, let's say, standard should be around 3%, but at least reach 1% to stay in competitive terms with other countries. Good ratio is the military expenditures when compared with health and education. So if you compare health and education expenditures in the national budget versus military expenditure, the ratio for Moldova is good. And also, how is the trend in distribution of income? There is an improvement when you compare the 20% at the bottom of income and the 20% at the top. There is an average yearly improvement in the distribution. Okay, I'm almost finished. I just want to say that human development and the sustainable development goals, which you certainly know, the 17 sustainable development goals, are very much related. And in order to reach higher level of human development, one needs to do the utmost to reach the 17 sustainable development goals by 2030. In my opinion, particularly important are these three for Moldova that you see highlighted there. Sustainable, inclusive growth, because if you do not, although growth and the economy is not everything, it's important to have the fiscal space to improve life in all other aspects, and particularly decent work for all. The reduction of inequalities, particularly the gender gap, is important for all countries, including Moldova, and promoting responsible, accountable, transparent institutions seems to be necessary to have good policies in the long term for sustainable development. I'm here in Moldova fundamentally because we are presenting the Millennium International Documentary Film Festival. We do this in Brussels every year, and we bring it to a number of countries. These are artistic, independent documentaries, however linked somehow to the Sustainable Development Goals. So we'll be showing 6 films in Chisinau from today, 2 per day, and so these films shows elements that are related to Sustainable Development Goals. We do that because we believe Sustainable Development Goals are not a bureaucratic requirement or a statistic requirement. It's something that should really concern each one of us, because it addresses our quality of life. It addresses the need not to leave anyone behind. So to eliminate poverty, to eliminate hunger from the world, to eliminate excessive inequalities, to eliminate the climate change that is so much hanging on us. So it is of everybody interest. So you have to demand to your government to observe the commitment that they have taken. All the countries have committed to reach the SDGs by 2030. But without public opinion pressure, without the scrutiny of civil society, government may forget or may not take the policies that they have committed to take. So it's important people understand what the SDGs are, why they are important, what does it mean for regular people, an SDG. This is why we have promoted this form of dissemination, the documentary art, which is particularly relevant because it speaks to your mind, but also to your emotions. And so you can generate understanding and knowledge of the other people, the other countries, at the same time generate some empathy with the situation that people face. There are some documentaries that, for instance, show the impact on families in some countries of climate change already today, how this destroys completely their lives. Now, you can understand that rationally, but when you see it, it's different, because then you really feel involved emotionally, and this is important. This is why we have made this combination of awareness of Sustainable Development Goals and art through the documentary films. You can see this picture is Ban Ki-moon, the former Secretary General of the UN, with the President and the Artistic Director of the festival in Brussels. Now, is this utopia? This is the last slide. Is this utopia that we have to leave no one behind? Can this be reached? Certainly, yes. Poverty has been reduced very, very much over the last 30 years. The world has never been as developed in human terms as today. So there is progress. We need to keep to be optimistic and believe that poverty is no fate. Hunger is not destiny. it depends on us, it depends on the policies, it depends on the choices we make. But poverty can be eradicated completely, extreme poverty can be eradicated from the face of Earth. China is a very good example. By 2030 or 2040, there will be fundamentally most people in the middle class in those countries. So it is no destiny, and already Victor Hugo knew that almost 2 centuries ago, when in a speech to the National Assembly, to the parliament there, he said, look, we should not be satisfied until when we have eradicated completely poverty from the planet. It is feasible and must be our obsession. This is also what Human Development SDGs are telling us. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope I have not bored you.
Mulțumesc mult, stimate domnule Antoni Vigilante. În continuare, dragi studenți, cu siguranță aveți întrebări la domnul oaspete. Dacă aveți, vă rog, fiți îndrăzneți și cine are întrebări? Please. Haideți, fiți mai îndrăzneți.
Be aware that if you do not ask me questions, I will ask you questions.
I will ask in English.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Cojocaru Filip. I'm studying of Faculty International Relations, and my question is, which is your opinion about general opinion about the Republic of Moldova? Thank you.
I do not have a personal opinion. The opinion that I can have is what comes out from my digging into the report and finding out what the indicators tell us and what people tell us. I'm puzzled by 2 or 3 things that I found peculiar. One is, in your country, this is one of the lowest trust in government country. I think only Ukraine does worse than you. This is generally Europeans are cynical and do not trust their governments. Latin Americans too. But in your case, you have a 13% trust in government, which means that the institutions need to be improved, to be transparent, to be accountable, and to be credible. So it's work to be done there. Second, I'm very concerned by this violence against women. I don't understand it completely because the level of violence on average in the society doesn't seem to be very high, the homicide rate. So there's a huge phenomenon of domestic violence, and then this has to be addressed with education campaigns, with prevention. Obviously, if this is true, there may be mistakes, you never know in the statistics. And the last one is the structure of the economy. The reliance on migration and remittances is excessive. The labor force participation is too low to allow the country to progress. People seeking employment or being active on the labor market. So I think there is a lot of potential which has not been used yet in the functioning of systems and institutions and in the participation of people. The country seemed to me, for the little I've seen, beautiful, certainly enjoyable to live here. So I'm sure that those that migrate do not migrate because they don't like the country, but probably because they don't find opportunities for a decent life. So I think there is a huge potential. I've seen it in tourism as well. So it's a country that is not using its potential. That's what I think. In spite of everything, still belong to the high human development category, so you shouldn't feel miserable because in comparative terms, it's okay. It's a relatively high human development with a lot of improvement possible. That's the idea I've made of your country. I'm not new to the region. I've worked 5 years in Bulgaria, so I kind of know a little bit the situation, the mentality, the change, the structures. I think it is possible, but a lot depends on the demand that people express. And when I say the demand, is mostly coming from young people, because they have to invest in their future. I mean, older people, they can be tired, they can be skeptical, they can be cynical. But young people need to be energetic and enthusiastic and believe in their potential, in the potential of their country, and participate and work for it.
Mulțumim. Mai sunt întrebări? Da.
So, hello, Mr. Antonio. How many times you think that we need to eliminate poverty in Moldova? Because, in my opinion, it's impossible, and it's very hard for us.
And the answer is that I don't know, but that is not impossible. That is for sure. I can guarantee that eliminating poverty is possible in each and every country, including those that are much behind Moldova. If you look at the report and go through it and see the changes from 1990 to 2017 in some countries, you will find that even in countries you don't expect, if you start a virtuous circle of good policies, you can eliminate poverty a lot faster than one thinks. Poverty has been reduced by half between 1990 and 2015 in the world. In 25 years, we have reduced poverty by half. We hope to eliminate extreme poverty altogether by 2030. So impossible doesn't exist, but it depends on the policies that are used and adopted and on the resources. So it may take some time, yes. Actually, I do not know the poverty incidence in Moldova according to national line or international standards. If I remember well, we're not extremely high. We're not extremely high. And you see that with the level of service you have, you should be able to improve, because education levels are good. Health levels are not bad. So you have premises that should allow all the society to improve. How long it takes, it depends on the policies the country takes, and particularly the restructuring, I suppose, of the economy.
Mulțumim.
My question is linked with women that feel unsafe in our environment. So my question is that what are the ways to redress this situation in our country? Thank you.
Okay, let me ask you, so you agree with this finding? You find it credible?
No, I'm worried about it.
But you find it credible, or you are surprised?
I find it credible because I'm one of these women that feel unsafe in this environment. And I think that it is very stressful for women, not only in daily life, but in family also, that you say that it all comes from family problems. But what are the ways to redress? Thank you.
A combination of several policies. I think one important thing is education. So to make sure that not only in school, but also in informal education and civic education, campaigns are started that try to do two things. Push the guilty feeling of the perpetrators of violence and their sense of being outcast and not acceptable in society. And the other side, to stimulate women to prevent violence and to denounce violence when it happens. Because the worst enemy of violence against women is silence. If women are silent and society is silent, this cannot change. If it is put on the table, at least you have a base from which to start changing. In some countries, we have tried with social advertising campaigns on television and through the media, on internet, exactly expressing this concept that this should not be put under the carpet, but on the contrary, be discussed and prevented with different modalities. It depends on the type of violence as well. Sorry to be so specific, but one thing is rape and one thing is beating. They require different instruments to be fought. If rape is an instrument, for instance, in some countries we have resorted even to publish in the street posters with the pictures of the rapist. So to make, public shame and make girls, babies, and women aware. If you see this guy, stay away. Then you have to improve the judicial and legislative treatment of this. Unless this is sanctioned by law and by justice, people feel impunity in the violence. So there are instruments that have to do with the legal and justice system, and the other one is to do with education, sensitivity, and social acceptance, which is very slow to change, but you have to start. And then gradually mentality will change, and also the habit will change. You probably cannot eliminate it ever radically. It exists in every country. But I think it can be improved with a variety of instruments. But women particularly have to be very vocal in demanding these measures. Have to express very strongly the need, the desire, the demand for them. Unless this happens, things will not change by themselves, miraculously. This doesn't exist. It requires positive efforts, and that's to be done by the government and by society at the same time. But one is to start, you have to take the lead off the pot. Otherwise it remains an unspoken phenomena, something not to be mentioned, and so on.
Thank you.
Mai sunt întrebări?
Hello, thank you for this super interesting presentation, sir. I was having a question about the comparison of our country with other countries from the region. You've mentioned a few times that we are have a score which is quite general or ordinary for this region, and I'm just curious, due to the fact that we are quite a peculiar region. We are between EU, and on the other hand, we are neighboring to all the ex-USSR community, and as a country which is former USSR country. So the scores are closer to countries that are, the region is countries which are closer to EU or closer to more Eastern countries? Because I think the gaps are quite big between maybe Bulgaria, Romania, and on the other hand, Ukraine on basically all the indicators. And do you think what would you think that are the reasons, if there is a gap, of that gap between maybe our Eastern and Western countries? Maybe this is the EU influence on EU policies influencing the quality of life in our Western neighbors. Thank you, sir.
Yes, you're right. I mean, the group to which I mostly compare Moldova to is, as I said, East Europe and Central Asia. This excludes the members of the European Union. The group is formed by these countries, I'll tell you. We have a list. There are 17 countries in this group: Albania, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Belarus, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Georgia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Moldova, Montenegro, Serbia, Tajikistan, former Yugoslavian Republic of Macedonia, Turkey, Turkmenistan, Ukraine, and Uzbekistan. This is the group defined as East Europe and Central Asia. So so they are not members of the EU, part of the previous, let's say, Soviet kind of regime, and so it is found to be comparable because they are all developing and changing structures and systems. So I think the comparison is reasonable. It would be unreasonable to compare with EU members. Well, of course, part of the reason of the different pace has to do with the EU. There is no doubt. I mean, if you think historically of the jump and progress that some countries have been able to do thanks to become member of the European Union, you can see that that's a factor that is primary. Spain and Portugal have had a phenomenal development thanks to becoming members of the EU. So Moldova now has an association agreement with the EU. We should make the best out of it, hoping that if this is your desire, that one day you will join as well. It is, the European Union is open to you. They are ready when you are ready to have you as a member. So I think that this is one of the factors that influence also the results that we have seen. A second cause of differences is the availability of resources, of natural resources. This has unavoidably an impact. If you have gas or oil, and certainly you have an asset that you can use and you can improve your services thanks to those revenues. So there are many elements. Nonetheless, there are countries that are totally deprived of any natural resources that have done wonders in history. So not because you have not many natural resources that you are condemned or you're sentenced to be less developed than others. I think it's a question of pace, acceleration. As you can see, remember the slide showing the improvement in human development? It's not that Moldova is not improving, it is improving, but at a slower pace. So one has to find a way to accelerate.
Mulțumim! Aducem mulțumiri, stimatul domn Antonio Vigilante, pentru lecția publică la care cred că cu siguranță ați avut ce învăța. Cu alte ocazii deja îi veți oferi și alte întrebări dacă le aveți. Și vă îndemn să veniți la Centrul de Informare al ONU în cadrul OLIM, da, care este localizat la etajul 6, în cadrul Departamentului de Informație Mobilitate Economică OLIM, unde aveți acces absolut la toate publicațiile editate sub egida ONU și la fel să participați pe viitor la alte activități organizate în cadrul acestui centru. Vă mulțumim și vă dorim o zi bună!